I was standing at my desk when Victoria handed me the reassignment memo. Not emailed, handed, on actual paper, like she wanted to watch my face. Effective immediately, she said, that smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Daniel handles pressure better than you. She said it the way you'd comment on the weather. Casual. Final. I looked down at the paper. My workflows. My integrations. My 3 years of architecture that kept Paris Technologies running like a heartbeat. All of it, reassigned to Daniel Foster, who'd been here 8 months and spoke fluently in buzzwords but had never once mapped a dependency chain. The document was crisp, professionally formatted. Someone had taken the time to make my dismissal look official. I noticed the signature at the bottom, Victoria's, bold and certain. Above it, a single paragraph that reduced 3 years of work to a personnel decision. I nodded. Set the paper down flat on my desk, corners aligned. Understood. Victoria's smile widened slightly, like she'd expected tears or protest. When neither came, she left, her heels clicking against the polished floor with a rhythm that sounded almost triumphant. I watched her go, watched her stop at Daniel's desk 3 rows over, watched her lean in to say something that made him grin. I didn't move for a long time after that. Just stood there, feeling the fluorescent hum of the office, the distant keyboard clatter, the careful nothing in my chest where something used to be. Through the window, I could see the parking lot, cars lined up in neat rows. Everything in its place. Everything except me. I'd built the entire operational backbone of Paris Technologies from the ground up. When I started, they were still running processes through email chains and shared Excel sheets, missing deadlines, hemorrhaging client trust. I came in as a senior analyst, and within 6 months, I'd designed an integration system that connected every department, sales to fulfillment, client services to finance, development to deployment. Automated handoffs. Real-time tracking. Fail-safes at every critical junction. The first system I built was the sales to fulfillment pipeline. Before me, sales would close a deal, send an email to fulfillment, and hope someone saw it before the client started calling. I designed a trigger system that captured every closed deal the moment it hit the CRM, automatically generated work orders, assigned resources based on availability and skill match, and sent confirmations to everyone who needed to know. Response time went from 3 days to 3 hours. Then came the client services integration. Support tickets that used to languish in an inbox now routed automatically based on issue type, priority, and technician expertise. The system learned patterns, which problems tended to escalate, which clients needed extra attention, which solutions worked most consistently. Customer satisfaction scores jumped 23 points in the first quarter. Finance integration was the most complex. I had to connect billing cycles, project milestones, resource allocation, and client payments into a single coherent flow. The CFO told me it couldn't be done, that the systems were too different, that we'd need to hire an outside firm. I did it in 6 weeks, working nights and weekends, mapping every data point, building translation layers, testing until my eyes burned. Victoria joined a year later as VP of Operations. She had an MBA from somewhere impressive and a way of talking that made executives lean forward in meetings. She didn't understand the systems, not really, not the way you need to understand something you'd have to fix if it broke. But she understood optics. She knew how to present my work as departmental success in quarterly reviews. I remember the first time she presented her improvements to the executive team. I'd spent 3 months building a predictive analytics layer that could forecast project bottlenecks 5 days before they happened. Victoria turned it into a PowerPoint deck with graphs and charts, used phrases like proactive resource optimization and strategic capacity management. The CEO called it visionary. She got a bonus. I got a thank you email. I told myself it didn't matter. The work mattered. The systems mattered. Recognition was just ego. Daniel arrived with a recommendation from someone on the board. He had energy, confidence, a designer wardrobe. In meetings, he spoke about optimizing throughput and stakeholder alignment while I sat quietly in the corner, making notes about which APIs would need updates. Victoria loved him immediately. He was the kind of visible talent that made her look good. I was the kind of invisible infrastructure that just worked. When I built something, it didn't need fanfare. It needed to function at 3 a.m. when a client deadline hit. It needed to catch errors before they cascaded. It needed to be so seamless that people forgot it existed. That was my mistake. I'd made myself forgettable. The day before Victoria handed me that memo, Daniel had given a presentation about reimagining our operational paradigm. He'd used 17 slides to describe what amounted to changing the color scheme on a dashboard. Victoria had applauded. The sales director had called it innovative. I'd sat there, watching him take credit for interface improvements I'd coded 6 months earlier, and said nothing. Because that's what I did. I said nothing. I fixed things in silence. I worked in the margins. I built the foundation everyone else stood on and never asked them to notice. I went home that night and sat in my apartment with all the lights off. My phone buzzed twice, texts from colleagues who'd heard. I didn't answer. I just sat there in the dark, feeling the shape of what had been taken, and what, somehow, hadn't been. They'd taken my title, my projects, my seat at the table. But they couldn't take the 3 years I'd spent learning every system's breaking point. They couldn't take the mental map I carried, which processes fed which, where the fragile connections lived, what would collapse if you pulled the wrong thread. I thought about all the documentation I'd written. Detailed, comprehensive guides to every system I'd built. They were sitting in a shared drive somewhere, probably unread. Daniel would need them now. I wondered if he'd understand what he was looking at. If he'd grasp that every system had hidden dependencies, fail-safes built in layers, backup processes that only triggered under specific conditions. I'd built in redundancies, yes. But I'd also built in complexity. Not maliciously, that was just what robust systems required. They had to account for edge cases, unexpected inputs, cascade failures. They had to be intelligent enough to handle situations their designer couldn't predict. Daniel didn't know what edge cases were. I'd heard him talking once about keeping things simple, about not overthinking it. He thought simplicity meant fewer moving parts. He didn't understand that sometimes complexity was the only thing standing between functionality and catastrophe. I opened my laptop. Not to work, I wasn't doing that anymore. To think. Outside my window, the city hummed with late-night traffic. I made tea, chamomile that smelled like patience, and started taking notes. Not about Paris technologies. About everything I knew. Everything I'd learned from building systems that couldn't fail. By morning, I had a plan. I called it Sovereign Systems. The name mattered. Sovereign, self-governing, autonomous, free from external control. I registered the LLC on a Thursday. Built the website over the weekend, clean, minimal, deliberately sparse. No buzzwords. Just a simple statement, workflow architecture for companies that can't afford to break. I spent hours on that single sentence. Every other consultant's website I looked at was full of promises about transformation and innovation and disruption. They were selling magic. I was selling something more boring and infinitely more valuable, reliability. The model was consulting, but not the kind Paris Technologies would recognize. I wasn't selling seminars or frameworks. I was selling what I actually knew, the ability to look at a company's operations and see exactly where the invisible dependencies lived. The ability to build systems that worked in the dark, when no one was watching. My rates were deliberately high. $300 an hour, 4-hour minimum for emergency calls. $1,000 a day for project work. I knew what I was worth now. More importantly, I knew that companies desperate enough to hire me wouldn't blink at the cost. I reached out to 3 former colleagues who'd left Paris Technologies over the past 2 years. People who'd worked with me, who knew what I could do. I'm taking clients, I said. Small projects only. Companies that need something bulletproof. The first inquiry came within 48 hours. It was a 6-person startup drowning in their own growth. They'd built a product people wanted, but their order fulfillment kept breaking. They'd hired someone who promised to streamline operations, but 3 months in, things were worse. They were desperate, and desperate companies don't have budget for consultants with pretty slides. They had budget for someone who could stop the bleeding. The founder's name was Owen Park, and when he called me, I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "We're losing money on every order that doesn't ship," he said. "We're losing customers. I don't even know what's breaking anymore. The guy we hired keeps talking about process optimization, but nothing's getting better." "Tell me what happens when someone places an order," I said. He walked me through it. Customer checks out. Payment processes. Order confirmation sends. Then, nothing. Sometimes the warehouse gets a pick list. Sometimes they don't. No pattern he can see. No error messages. Just silence, and 3 days later, an angry customer email. I knew that pattern. I'd seen it before. You have a silent failure in your integration layer, I told him. Something's dropping messages between your payment processor and your inventory system. Probably an API timeout that's not being caught. Your confirmation is sending before the handoff completes, so the customer thinks everything's fine, but the warehouse never hears about it. Silence on the other end. Then, how did you know that? Because it's the most common failure point in e-commerce systems, and it's the hardest one to see. When can I access your infrastructure? I spent a week mapping their entire workflow. Found the problem in 2 days, a handoff between their payment processor and inventory system that failed silently about 30% of the time. Orders would process, money would move, but the warehouse would never get the pick list. Customers waited. Emails piled up. No one could figure out why. The issue was elegant in its simplicity. Their payment processor would send a webhook notification when payment cleared. Their inventory system was supposed to catch that webhook and generate a pick list. But if the inventory system was busy, processing another order, running a scheduled backup, literally anything that took up processing capacity, it would miss the webhook entirely. And webhooks don't retry. They fire once, and if nobody's listening, that message disappears into the void. I built a monitoring layer that caught the failures in real time and rerouted them. Added a queue system so webhooks would stack up instead of disappearing. Implemented logging so they could see exactly what broke and when. Documented everything in plain language their junior developer could maintain. The fix took 3 days to build and test. I wrote 40 pages of documentation. I spent 2 hours on the phone with their developer, walking through every scenario, every potential edge case, every way the system could fail and how the monitoring layer would catch it. They paid my invoice within 24 hours. The founder sent a voice memo. I don't know what you did, but we haven't missed an order in 6 days. That's never happened. Ever. I saved it. Not for pride, for evidence. Proof that invisible work could become visible if you chose the right audience. The second client came through a referral. Then a third. I wasn't advertising. I wasn't networking. I was just solving problems other people couldn't see, and the people I helped started talking. The second client was a medical supply distributor whose inventory counts were always wrong. They'd blame warehouse staff, implement new counting procedures, hold training sessions. Nothing helped. I spent 2 days watching their warehouse operations and found the issue. Their barcode scanners were logging items as received before the items physically entered the secure storage area. If something got damaged or lost in those 15 feet between the loading dock and the storage cage, the system thought it had been received anyway. I added a second scan point and a reconciliation process. Their inventory accuracy went from 72% to 98%. The third client had a scheduling system that kept double booking their service technicians. The technicians would show up to jobs that were already being handled, or arrive at empty buildings because the customer had been scheduled twice and only told once. I found 7 different places where scheduling data was being entered: mobile app, web portal, phone system, 3 different office staff members, and an automated email parser, and none of them were talking to each other in real time. I built a central scheduling hub with real-time conflict detection. Double bookings dropped to 0. By month 3, I had a waiting list. I worked from my apartment, usually late at night when the rest of the world went quiet. There was something almost meditative about it, digging into someone else's broken systems, finding the hidden fracture, sealing it clean. Every project was a puzzle with a definite solution, and when I finished, something that had been chaotic became stable. My apartment became my workshop. I'd always been neat, organized, but now it took on a different character. My desk faced the window, looking out over the city. I kept my laptop centered, my notebook to the left, my tea to the right. Everything in its place. When systems at work were chaos, I needed my physical space to be order. I developed rituals. Before starting a new project, I'd read through all the documentation the client had sent, making notes in my notebook with a fountain pen. Something about the physical act of writing helped me think. After finishing a project, I'd update my master document, a growing list of failure patterns I'd seen, solutions I'd implemented, lessons I'd learned. No one at Paris Technologies knew. I'd signed an NDA, but it covered proprietary information, not general skills. I wasn't touching their clients or their data. I was building an entirely separate world, one where competence mattered more than visibility. I wondered, sometimes, how Daniel was doing. Whether he'd figured out what my documentation actually meant. Whether Victoria had noticed anything yet. Then, 3 weeks after my reassignment, my phone rang at 11 p.m. Victoria's name on the screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Hello? Mary. Her voice was tight, clipped. I need you to walk Daniel through the integration protocols. Something's jammed, and we have a client launch at 8 a.m. I was quiet for a moment, listening to the hum of my laptop fan. Outside, a siren wailed past. I'm not on that project anymore. I know, but frustration crept in. He's having trouble isolating the issue. It would take you 5 minutes. It would take me 5 minutes because I built it. Daniel handles pressure better than me, remember? I'm sure he'll figure it out. Silence on the other end. Long enough that I almost felt bad. Almost. Mary, this is a $50,000 launch. If it fails, then you should have thought about that before reassigning the person who built it. I kept my voice level, neutral. Not angry. Just factual. I'm a consultant now, Victoria. I have my own clients. If Paris Technologies wants my time, you'll need to negotiate a contract. I heard her inhale sharply. You can't be serious. Completely. My rate is $300 an hour, 4-hour minimum. I can send over an agreement tomorrow. She hung up without another word. I sat there in the dark, feeling something unfamiliar spreading through my chest. Not satisfaction, exactly. Something quieter. Something like reclamation. The next morning, I woke to an email from Victoria's assistant requesting my consulting rates and availability. I replied with my standard contract. They signed it before noon. The problem, when I logged in remotely, was exactly what I'd expected. Daniel had tried to simplify one of the integration workflows. He'd removed what he thought was redundant error handling, a backup process that caught failed API calls and rerouted them through a secondary pathway. Without that backup, when the primary API had a hiccup, which happened, because all APIs have hiccups, the entire data flow stopped. Orders piled up in a queue with no way to process them. It took me 45 minutes to fix. I restored the backup process, cleared the queue, and verified that everything was flowing correctly. Then I spent 3 hours writing documentation that explained, in terms even Daniel might understand, why every piece of redundant code existed and what would break if it was removed. I billed them for 8 hours, the 4-hour minimum for the emergency fix, plus another 4 to document what I'd done so Daniel could maintain it. I was professional, thorough, and completely impersonal. When I sent the final invoice, I included a line item breakdown that made it very clear what they'd paid for: emergency intervention for undocumented workflow failure. The payment cleared within 24 hours. 2 weeks later, another call. Different crisis, same pattern. Daniel had tried to optimize something and broken 3 dependent processes. This time they didn't argue about the rate. I started to understand something then. Paris Technologies had mistaken my indisability for replaceability. They thought the systems ran themselves, that anyone with enough confidence could manage them. They were learning, expensively, that infrastructure had a memory. That you couldn't just swap out the architect and expect the building to stand. Over the next 4 months, Paris Technologies called me 6 more times. Each time, Daniel had made a change that seemed logical in isolation but broke something downstream. Each time, I fixed it, documented it, and invoiced them. Each time, the invoice was larger than the last, not because I was raising rates, but because the problems were getting more complex. By the 6th emergency call, I could hear the strain in Victoria's voice. "Can we set up a retainer?" she asked. "This is getting expensive." "No," I said simply. "I don't do retainers for former employers. You had me on retainer. It's called a salary. You decided you didn't need it." By month 6, Sovereign Systems had 15 active clients and a reputation in a very specific niche, companies that had hired the wrong person to fix the right problem. I became known for two things: finding what others missed, and explaining it in language anyone could understand. My reputation grew through whispered recommendations. A CEO would mention me to another CEO at a conference. A developer would tell a friend about the consultant who actually understood systems architecture. I started getting emails that began with "Someone told me you're the person who fixes impossible problems." I hired my first employee in month 7. Her name was Claire Young, and she'd been fired from a mid-size logistics company for not being a culture fit. When I interviewed her, she walked me through a project she'd designed that cut processing time by 40%. They'd implemented it, thanked her, then replaced her with someone's nephew who had an MBA and no technical background. "I don't care about culture fit," I told her. "I care if you can see systems other people walk past." She started the following Monday. Claire was quiet, methodical, the kind of person who would spend an hour staring at a flowchart before touching a single line of code. We worked well together because we both understood that speed was the enemy of reliability. Her first project was a scheduling system for a cleaning service franchise. They had 47 locations and a central dispatch system that was constantly out of sync. Claire mapped every data flow, found 12 different points where timing conflicts could occur, and rebuilt the entire scheduling logic from the ground up. It took her 5 weeks. It worked perfectly. By month 9, we'd handled 43 projects. Our success rate was 100%. Not because we were lucky, but because we didn't take projects we couldn't solve. I'd learned to read desperation in initial client calls, the difference between a company that needed help and a company that needed a miracle. We only took the ones we could actually help. A journalist reached out in month 9. She was writing a piece about women in operations technology, and someone had mentioned my name. I almost declined. Then I thought about Victoria's face when she'd handed me that reassignment memo, and I said yes. The interview was careful, factual. I didn't trash Paris Technologies. I didn't name anyone. I just talked about what it meant to build critical systems in silence, to be essential but invisible, and what happened when you decided to step into your own light. "What made you start your own firm?" the journalist asked. "I stopped waiting for permission to matter," I said. She liked that line. It became the pull quote, printed in bold above a photo of me at my desk. The piece ran in a mid-tier tech publication. It wasn't viral, but it was seen by the right people. My client inquiries tripled. Within 2 weeks, I had interview requests from 3 other publications, speaking invitations from 2 industry conferences, and a call from a venture capital firm asking if I'd ever considered scaling up. I declined the speaking engagements. I wasn't interested in being visible that way. But I did accept one podcast interview, a quiet conversation with a host who asked thoughtful questions about systems thinking and organizational blindness. That episode got shared in Slack channels and engineering forums. More clients arrived. 10 months after I left, Victoria requested a meeting. Not a phone call, not an email, an in-person meeting at a coffee shop near the Paris Technologies office. I almost said no. Then curiosity got the better of me. She was already seated when I arrived, looking more tired than I remembered. No smile this time. No smugness. Her suit was still expensive, still perfectly pressed, but something in her posture had changed. She looked diminished somehow. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. I ordered coffee and waited. "We're having some challenges," she began. "Corporate speak, even now. The integration systems have become difficult to manage. Daniel's doing his best, but there are complexities he didn't anticipate." "There always are," I said quietly. She looked at me then, really looked. "We'd like to bring you back. Senior architect position. 20% increase from your previous salary. Full authority over operational systems." I sipped my coffee. It was too hot, bitter. I set it down carefully. "No." Victoria blinked. "Mary, I understand you're upset, but..." "I'm not upset. I'm just not interested." I kept my voice even. "You made a decision about my value. You were very clear about what you thought I was worth. I'm not angry, Victoria. I just believe you. That was a mistake." "Yes. It was. But it was your mistake, not mine. I don't need you to correct it." She opened her mouth, closed it. Tried again. What would it take? I thought about that. Really thought about it. Thought about the nights I'd spent building her systems, the weekends I'd sacrificed, the credit I'd watched her take. Thought about my apartment office, Claire working beside me, the clients who called us because they knew we saw what others missed. Nothing, I said finally. There's nothing you could offer. Because what I built with Sovereign Systems isn't just a business. It's proof. Proof that I don't need to be invisible to be valuable. Proof that the people who couldn't see me before were looking at the wrong things. I stood up, left money for the coffee on the table. Good luck with your systems, Victoria. I hope Daniel figures it out. I walked out into the afternoon light, feeling lighter than I had in years. Paris Technologies closed their operations division 8 months later. I read about it in a company-wide email that somehow still reached my old inbox. Restructuring to focus on core competencies, the CEO wrote. Daniel had moved to a different company. Victoria had taken a role somewhere else, a lateral move that read like a demotion if you understood corporate hierarchies. The systems I'd built were probably still running, somewhere in there. Duct taped together, barely functional, but running. Infrastructure has a long half-life, even when no one remembers who built it. I felt something when I read that email. Not triumph. Something sadder, more complicated. Grief for the years I'd spent there, for the work I'd poured into something that hadn't valued it. But also something like peace. Sovereign Systems evolved. We stopped taking small emergency fixes and started building long-term partnerships. Companies that wanted an architect, not a firefighter. We developed a model, 6-month engagements where we'd design a system, implement it, then train their team to maintain it. We'd stay on retainer for a year, then step back. It was slower work. More intentional. We weren't chasing crises anymore. We were building foundations. Claire and I moved into a proper office in month 14. Nothing fancy, a converted warehouse space with good light and quiet neighbors. We hired 2 more people, Andreas, a data architect who'd been laid off when his company automated his entire department, and Yuki, a project manager who understood that the best project management was invisible project management. We built a library of patterns, common failure modes we'd seen across industries, solutions that worked reliably, warning signs that something was about to break. We documented everything, not because we had to, but because we'd all lived through the pain of undocumented systems. Our client base shifted. Instead of desperate startups, we started attracting established companies that wanted to prevent problems rather than fix them. A regional hospital network hired us to audit their patient data systems. A manufacturing firm brought us in to redesign their supply chain integration. A university asked us to overhaul their enrollment and registration processes. The work was quieter, steadier. Less dramatic. More meaningful. 2 years after that coffee shop meeting, I got a package. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting on the label. Inside was a small leather notebook, expensive and used. And a card. You were right. I was looking at the wrong things. I held the notebook for a long time, feeling its weight. The leather was soft, well-made. The kind of object that would last. I opened it, saw the cream-colored pages, empty and waiting. Then I set it on my shelf, next to the first invoice Sovereign Systems ever sent. Some nights, I stay late in the office after Claire and the rest of the team have gone home. I sit in the quiet, listening to the hum of servers in the next room, the tick of the cooling system, the absence of chaos. The office has become something I never had at Paris Technologies, a space that reflects the work being done inside it. Clean lines, natural light, plants that Claire insists on maintaining. A whiteboard wall covered in system diagrams and notes. A small kitchen where we make coffee and talk through problems. Everything intentional. Everything chosen. I think about Victoria sometimes. About Daniel. About all the people at Paris Technologies who never learned my name but used the systems I built every single day. I wonder if they know, now, what they lost. I wonder if it matters. I used to think revenge was about making someone see what they'd missed. About forcing recognition, demanding apology. But sitting there in the dark, I understood something different. Revenge isn't fire. It's not bright or fast or consuming. Real revenge is a kiln. It's slow heat over time. It's taking everything that tried to break you and using it to forge something harder, something that belongs only to you. I didn't need Victoria to see me. I'd already seen myself. And that, in the end, was the only door I'd ever needed to walk through. The one I built. On my desk, next to my laptop, I keep a small card. Claire made it for me on our 1-year anniversary as a company. It's simple, just a quote in clean typography: "The best revenge is building something they can't take back." Every morning, I see it. Every morning, I remember why I'm here. Not because of what was taken from me, but because of what I created in its place. Sovereign Systems isn't just a business. It's a testament. Proof that invisibility was never weakness, it was preparation. All those years of building in silence, of going unrecognized, of watching others take credit for my work, they weren't wasted. They were training. I was learning how to build systems that couldn't fail. I just didn't know I was also learning how to build a life that couldn't be taken.